All right. So, so here we all are, and thanks for your patience as we detoured and improvised. A warm welcome, at any rate, to all of you for wherever you might have signed in from. My name is Dorothea van Moltke. I'm one of the owners of Labyrinth Books in Princeton, and I am particularly excited about this first conversation in our Personal Limits series on writing with Monica Huerta for her wonderful new book, which is the occasion for this series. I'm going to hold it up. Magical Habits. Yes. So that's the occasion. Monica is the one who had the idea for this series. She will be hosting it, and so I'll be turning things over to her in just a minute, but not before some thank yous and not before introducing her to all of you. So the biggest thanks go, of course, to Monica herself. The fact that she is reimagining the author talk, sort of decentering it from just a conversation about her own book and redirecting it into multiple conversations with other writers with whom her own project stands in sort of kinship. So that fact is not going to surprise any readers of Magical Habits. This is a book that breaks with old conventions or habits of intellectual practice, invents new ones pretty much on every page. So preparing the series for me personally has been an inspiration, and I plan to carry that forward to as a kind of promise to myself to keep trying to ask what it can mean to reinvent the book talk. So I'm therefore very grateful to be part of this experiment with all of you tonight and in the next months. It's a collective experiment, of course, and the co-sponsors for this series are many. Our thanks now go to all of them: the Princeton Public Library and at Princeton University, the Lewis Center, the Humanities Council, the English Department, and the Program in American Studies. And before I now introduce Monica, who in turn will introduce our two other wonderful guests, Sarah Chihaya and Merve Emre, a word just about the Q&A. We haven't really talked about this, but I'm going to make a decision here. I'm going to ask all of you to find the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and if and when you have questions, just line them up there. That will make it easier for us than if we have to sift through the chat to find your questions. And we're going to be sure to leave time to engage with what's on all of your minds. So because of our switcheroo, we also didn't have time to decide that, but I'm going to say maybe we'll leave sort of 15 minutes at the end or so. Does that sound good? Okay, so also want to mention that, of course, you can buy a copy both of Magical Habits and also of the Ferrante Letters, which is the project of Sarah's and Emre's that they're going to also be talking about from Labyrinth. You can find that online at labyrinthbooks.com. And if you enter Huerta at checkout, then you will get 10% off your entire order. So let me now tell you just a little bit about Monica before passing the mic. She is Assistant Professor of English and American Studies at Princeton. Her work is profoundly multidisciplinary, as you will quickly see when you pick up Magical Habits. That's a book that it works out the terms of its poetics and also of its critique of power, as much as the logic of property and the counter logics of self that are among its themes. Works all of that out in the personal archive of family history, in the reading of photographs, as much as in restaurant menus and in fairy tale mode. Her next book is called The Unintended Photography, Property, and the Aesthetics of Racial Capitalism. I would that it were radical capitalism, but it's racial capitalism. That will be out in 2022. Monica, you should know, is also the co-director of Organizing Stories toward a scholarly activist practice that connects students with veteran organizers who use storytelling in their organizing work. So while the series of events that we're launching tonight will engage with the work of many of Monica's fellow travelers in the project of dissolving boundaries between criticism and creativity, other boundaries as well. I'm sure we're going to be talking about some of that. Through the invention of idioms that insist on the personal. I want to be sure that we hold up for a minute also magical habits now at the onset of the series and then again and again over the coming months. The book develops many key terms. Magic and habits, of course, are among those, but also horizons. That orientation, that horizon is an orientation that moves, we move towards it, but it remains elusive and indeterminate. And Monica's book itself is just such a horizon, and it will serve as a horizon for our conversations, which we invite you to. You can find the future ones and the future sort of one a month with some pauses if you click on the events page at labyrinthbooks.com or also on Monica's website. They're all there. I'll just say, before bowing out, that among the things that I love about Magical Habits is the care that Monica takes in it of her younger selves. Our culture teaches us to discard our more naive or our beginner selves and to disavow that beginner form. Not so Monica. So hide and keep is another of the refrains in her book. But in this regard of the protection of the younger selves and the carrying forward of those selves, the operation is more one of show and tell or show and tell and shelter. And I'm going to just quote something very beautiful that she said in a recent interview, and then I'll really step aside. And here's that quote. As storytelling, the book importantly includes missteps I made. Magical Habits isn't offering a template for the right habits, but it is suggesting a tenacity toward being willing to become dedicated to continual divestment when another unfree layer makes itself known. So here now are Monica Huerta and Sarah Chihaya Merve Emre. I'm so glad you're here and can't wait to listen to all of you.
Thank you, Dorothea. That was a really humbling introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you all, with you, Merve, and you, Sarah, and with everybody who could join us today. Thank you for being here. And a special thank you to Dorothea and the crews at Labyrinth and the Princeton Public Library, to all of our partners, American Studies, English, the Lewis Center, the National Endowment of the Humanities. Thank you all for supporting this series. Dorothea and Labyrinth are such a bright spot for books and ideas experienced in community in Central Jersey. So I just really appreciate the fact that we're being brought together under their auspices. Yeah, so hi. I have the super pleasure of introducing Sarah and Merve, but before I do that, I thought I would just say a little bit about what I'm on about with the series. So on and off from college to now, and with lots of starts and stops, I worked on Magical Habits as a kind of secret. It was largely a conversation that I was having with myself, although I was never writing in any kind of journal sense. I was just writing. We can talk if you're curious later about the different genres that the book was before it is what it is now. It was lots of different things. But even if I wrote it as mostly a conversation with myself over the entirety of my adulthood up until now, I obviously wasn't totally alone. There's so much in the book that was shared experience in all kinds of relation. But even if that's very much the case, the work, besides for a very few good friends who read it at specific and not that many times, the writing was happening most of the time as me with my many past me's in the middle of the night from about 2 to 4 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. For that kind of project, one that was happening in the middle of the night with myself and my past selves, it felt really important to me to send the book out on its way in these conversations, not as only about itself, but as a way to be in conversation, like Dorothea was saying, about other forms of personal and critical experiments in writing. So these conversations in the next few months will put Magical Habits in conversations with overlapping ecosystems of thinking and reading and writing. And because really I want to think with you all, the people who are here with Merve and Sarah, about how writers are thinking about writing the personal, and maybe writing the personal differently in our moment of ongoing and collective crises, and what readers want that's maybe different in that moment of overlapping collective crises. But not only that, I wanted to do that work and that thinking out loud with people who I admired, obviously, but with people with whom I had personal connections to, or to pairs of people who were themselves friends with each other. That felt really, keeps feeling really important to me. So tonight, the happy thing is there's both. I've known Sarah Chihaya for just about a decade and a half, which is bananas, and even saying that feels very intense, but here we are. I have pictures from graduate school of misplaced pages. Hold on. I have pictures from graduate school of these gorgeous food magazine looking pies that she made for a Friendsgiving at the home I shared with our mutual friend, Irene. But it was when we were neighbors in Crown Heights years later that we became closer friends. Sarah's beautiful criticism about contemporary writing is anywhere you look, in the New York Review of Books, in Public Books, in PMLA, in Book Forum, in The Point, Contemporaries, among many others. She's an incredibly prolific critic and collaborator. She was a longtime editor at Contemporaries and is now a senior editor at the LA Review of Books. She's been working on a few books that I can't wait to get my hands on, including Bibliophobia, Misreading, and Being Misread. Like everyone, I admire Merve Emre also for her prolific and beautiful criticism. Merve writes for The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, Harper's, The New York Times Magazine, among others, and American Literature, American Literary History, and Modernism. Her books include Paraliterary, The Making of Bad Readers in Post-War America, and The Personality Brokers, which was selected as one of the best books of 2018 by The New York Times and lots of others, and including editing a gorgeous new edition of Mrs. Dalloway, which if you haven't seen its picture all over the internet, go find a picture. It's like among the most beautiful books I think I've ever seen. And she's finishing a book right now called Post-Discipline, Literature, Professionalism, and the Crisis of the Humanities. And here is a little surprise for her. She doesn't know this, but her essay, Two Paths for the Personal Essay from 2017 was really, really important to me as I was revising. In it, she asks, what if personal writing were not a manifestation of intimacy or interiority? What if art were a dish best served cold? I thought about that question for actual literal years as I was revising. And even though we've never met in real life, I have lots of affection for Merve as someone who is friends with and cares for Sarah. So thank you to Sarah and Merve for being here. I promised a kind of laid back and we're chatting over drinks vibe. So hi guys, how are you? That was my transition.
Hi Monica, hi Merve. Thank you for inviting us to be the first event in this series. I feel just tickled and honored and happy to be here with both of you. And thank you also to Dorothea and Labyrinth and the library and our department and everywhere else that has sponsored this. I'm just really excited. I'm excited for this, but I'm more excited actually to see the rest of the events in the series. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. If I mute, it's because there are very drunk students right outside of my office window sharing very personal things, which I don't feel like any of us need to hear. So that is why I might be on mute while everybody else is speaking, but I'm very excited to be here and thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks for being here.
Well, should we start by talking about magical habits?
We can.
That is the occasion for this event.
We can do that, totally.
Okay, I would like to start by embarrassing you a little bit.
Oh, good.
I want to share with everyone. I'm sure those of you who have a copy of Magical Habits on hand can turn with me to page 52 to look at this picture of Monica, baby Monica, which I love. I look at often. And I know you look at it often too, because you write about it and you write about how she is looking at you, and she has been with you in this process. And I know, you know, you and I have talked about this for several years as you were working on this book, and I read an early draft of it and was thinking about this. But I just want to follow up with what Dorothea said beautifully about this book. One of the things that I really admire about it is the way that you engage with all of the eyes in it, in a way that I think is very, I mean, I hate the word brave, but it is very brave to look back at your writing from 2001 and to engage with it in a serious way. And you write in the introduction or the preface, "The eye that travels here gathers and disperses without an interest in culminating, appearing, or restoring archives," which I think is a really interesting and innovative way of thinking about gathering your old selves, right? You're doing it without this kind of simple recuperative aim. You're doing it to be in constant conversation. And I think that's really admirable and hard. So I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about what it felt like, right? To do that, to gather these eyes and to not try and put them all together and make a comprehensive self, right? This isn't a kind of Pollyanna-ish like self-help narrative. It is in fact a really open discussion with parts of yourself that are hard to access, maybe not only parts of yourself, but also different genres that you've written in, right? You think about your undergrad thesis. If there are Princeton undergrads here, you might think about your own theses that you're working on. You know, you think about genres from the undergrad thesis to like personal emails or texts, academic writing, journaling, fairy tale. Like there are all these different parts that are all you, but they're also not you. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the kind of revision and the kind of conversation you found yourself in.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, what was it like? I mean, I think part of it is like it's really earnest, the fact that I was having a conversation with myself. Like that is a lot of where the writing came from. You know, there comes a point in the revision process where it like had to become something else because there was like a limit to the interest that someone else has in the conversation I have with myself. So that was a different kind of relationship. But over the, you know, let's say from like when I started like seriously thinking about something like a book that would have pieces of different things in grad school till now, I mean, the thesis stuff was hard. Like it was difficult, you know, it was difficult because, you know, we, in our job, we're trained to have a kind of antagonistic or shameful relationship to the person who had less wrought questions or had read fewer books or was less intellectually sophisticated. So I think professionally, I was trained to feel ashamed of the 21-year-old or the 20-year-old that had some really earnest questions about what does it mean that you know, there are family narratives in menus that are fictional, but they're being presented as though they're not. And that was, you know, like that was confusing for me when I was 21. And it wasn't less confusing for me when I'm now 40, but I just have a lot of architectures for explaining what's going on. And so I think part of the revision process, especially with the thesis parts, was about, I mean, one, understanding and trying to be really careful about how to present that writing, right? So like, especially once it was going in an academic press in an academic series, trying to be very careful about, you know, there are intellectual questions that are being asked by me when I'm 21, as there are for our students, right? Like they're asking intellectual questions, they tackle intellectual problems. So honoring that at the same time as marking to an audience, let's say of our peers and colleagues, that I didn't understand myself to be doing the same thing, let's say, as someone who spent 10 years researching the cultural history of Mexican restaurants in any city. And so that was a kind of balancing act, I think, to like honor, you know, the 21-year-old and also to honor the fact that I'm a grown person in a career with colleagues who I admire, and to frame that in such a way where that distinction was clear. With other bits, like, you know, it's like, I have the stories from when I was 18 and taking creative nonfiction classes or memoir classes, and I can see where bits of things or sentences came from. And like, now I have to go back into the archive, into my own archives, to like see where those bits came from. And when I look at them, I know what she was working out, you know, like I know that she was working out having a family that fell apart. I know that she was working out how she felt about it. I know that she was working out who she was amidst all of that. And so the feeling of like those bits to now is a little bit muted, right? So like the juxtaposition of like 40-year-old and 18-year-old is muted because I just worked on it for so long that like those little bits, like those phrases that I took from stories or whatever, became a phrase and another kind of sentence. So I think that, yeah, working on it for so long, I think muted some of the like shock of it, but it doesn't mean that it's not like a care that I was trying to take. Because one, I like, it's okay not to know things. It's okay to not know enough. It's okay to not know enough when you're confronted with a life thing that you're not sure what you think about yet. Like that, right? Like that, I don't think those are shameful experiences. And so the problem in some sense was like a professional apparatus wherein we're supposed to erase a learning process, but a kind of insistence in the fact that that learning process is actually really important and not shameful at all. So that was, I think, part of the balancing.
Can I ask two questions, but they're going to sound tendentious because that's like the only mode I.
No, I'm into it.
It's my default mode. I mean, I guess one thing I was thinking when you were saying that was I was wondering whether that shame is really a professionalized production. Like, don't we always feel ashamed, no matter what our professional apparatus teaches us, to look back on our younger self? You know, to what degree is that generated, or is that particular affect generated from the nature of what it is that we do? So that was just one thing that what you said made me think of, Monica. But then the other thing I was thinking was, well, one thing you surely must have known was that you were going to write about yourself, because I don't think I have any archives from, I mean, I have like a stray letter here or there from high school or whatever, but I don't have any archives from my early 20s. I certainly don't have anything that I wrote in college. I don't even know where I would find any of those things. I don't think I have much of what I wrote in graduate school either. So, I mean, you know, because when you were talking, I was thinking about those journals that you sometimes encounter, like Virginia Woolf's journals or Mary Butts's journals, where they're like, I'm writing this for my future biographer, or for me when I write my memoirs. And so one thing you must have known or intuited, at least, was that self-representation was a project that you were interested in, and that you were kind of laying, you know, you were scattering the breadcrumbs that you could follow back to those younger selves. So, I mean, I'd just be curious to hear you talk about one or both of those things. I had another question about heroism, but if we have time, we can get back to that.
Totally.
Are you saying that you've shared the only personal document that you've stored in the introduction to Annotated Mrs. Dalloway?
Truly, yes. No, it really is the only artifact that I have. I mean, I'm a vigorous email deleter. Like I think, and sorry, again, I said I'm going to sound tendentious, but I think it just takes an extraordinary kind of hubris to find yourself interesting enough to believe that one day you will write about yourself. So yes. So I'm curious in, I guess, shame on the one hand and hubris on the other, as two kind of youthful postures, maybe.
Totally. So no, I mean, yes and no, probably, right? Like there was so the yes part is like, I took a memoir class the summer after freshman year. So like that, but I don't know. I definitely didn't believe that was going to matter to anybody, that I took a memoir class. I mean, I don't think it matters to anybody now, right? Like that, I don't think that's interesting. but I did. But then there was like a lot of years that I didn't do that. And when I started training for this job, this is what I thought I was going to be writing exclusively. Yeah, so like in some ways, like yes and no, like it really is earnest. Like it was a conversation I was having with myself. And if I thought that there was some potential audience and some potential future, I didn't actually start believing that in any real way until I was at postdoc in Durham. Because before it was the form that it is now, like I thought I was writing a novel. So the novel had like elements of the writing that is in the book now, but it was trying to be a novel. And I was trying, I mean, I am, it turns out, a terrible novelist, never hired me to write a novel.
My other tendentious claim is I don't think anyone in our profession should write a novel, but I'm just going to throw that bomb out there and walk away from it. So yeah.
And then the shame bit, I mean, no, right? It was like, is our job the one that's particular about being shameful about learning? No, but I think we're particular in the sense that we acquire a kind of polish and performance about the fact that we've never learned anything, that we just know this thing that we're saying right now that is different from other jobs, definitely, in the sense that the practice is the thing. Whereas in other jobs, like, you know, you have coworkers that you know that you worked on this deck with, and that's part of the job, right? I don't know terms from other jobs, but I'm imagining that those are terms.
I don't know anything about any other jobs, but
I worked like 3 other jobs and they were very close to this job. So no, I don't think we're like special in the sense that we feel shame about that. I think there's like a shared, I think in general, we don't, as a culture, we don't think productively about what learning is, right? Like there's a way of thinking of all learning as a kind of shameful activity, and it isn't. It is very exciting. But learning is letting go. Learning is, I thought I knew something, but I didn't. Learning is, I didn't know that thing, and now I maybe do a little bit, but I don't know enough about it. Learning is a posture of humility and not understanding, actually. And that, again, you know, if you're standing with a certain relation to your past self, that's always going to feel shameful. So yeah, we're not special in that way.
Well, I wonder if one way that, well, we're not special, but one way that our profession does insist that we think about or that we present ourselves is, and this phrase is on my mind only because I'm lecturing in my undergrad lecture right now about Chimamanda Adichie, and one of the things that Achebe said about her when very early in her career was that she had arrived almost fully formed, which is like a really interesting thing to say about someone, but there is this sort of pressure, right, as a scholar to arrive at your project or to present your project as though it appeared in the world fully formed, right? I mean, this is something that our book sort of works against, but I mean, I guess that sort of leads me to a question that maybe relates to hubris, both hubris and shame, which is, are there moments looking back in your archive and also thinking about the fact that you're writing a scholarly book at the same time, right? Your 2 books are coming out back to back. Were there documents that you look back at that you thought, oh, adult Monica was there already? You know, you were already there. Were there sort of moments that you identified that surprised you in that way, in that, you know, positive or like exciting way?
Not that much in the thesis, to be totally frank. But so the beginning, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more next time with Lily, but like the beginning of the book, which is like this list of gifts, that's like not the entire list because I wasn't 25 yet, but like that list was in like one of the stories that I wrote when I was in that summer class after freshman year. So is that, but that's not like an adult, that's not an adult, and the way it's framed is like not quite adult, so maybe no. I mean, I think like there are some insights that I frame in the book, you know, in language that the adult is using, but in spirit is what my little kid self was thinking. So like, you know, when I'm watching family members operate in the restaurants, and the like impressions that I'm communicating about the little kid who's watching or impatient or confused, that is the case, right? Like I was having those feelings, but I think the way that I frame them is as adult me, even if I'm talking about an actual thing. And then yeah, I mean, I think, right, Merve, like one of the reasons your essay was so important to me was exactly about like not making the thing that I was saying be about me necessarily, or like what I thought was important about the book about me necessarily. So, I mean, if there's a kind of hubris in having written it, it's the sense that like I have been a person, and so I've been thinking inside of being this person. And if that's hubris, then okay.
Well, I mean, I think it raises the interesting question of heroism and the heroic posture, which you talk about in the introduction to the book, because that might also be another way of claiming a particular I, and of believing that that I can do something in the world. And I'm curious to hear, I don't think I have the same allergy to heroism or to ideas of heroism that you do. And in fact, I might even place the heroic impulse elsewhere and say that where I feel a kind of unjustifiable heroism in literary studies, for instance, is really sort of self-aggrandizing claims about the political implications of the kind of work that we do, right? That's where like my understanding of heroism comes in, and where my kind of allergy to it emerges. And so I'm just curious about what you mean when you talk about heroism, and how that does or doesn't relate to either shame or hubris.
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. I mean, the relation to hubris is the more obvious one, but I actually I want to think more about the relation to shame bit, because one of the things that I was trying hard, even though there was a criticism there, one of the things that I was trying to do was not sort of redistribute shame. So I don't think that is an interesting or emancipatory move, right? So my critique of heroism, or the way that heroism shows up in the forms that we write as academics, isn't about making ourselves feel bad about it. Even, right, like there's a moment when I say, right, like I'm more critical of totalizing knowledges than I am about the heroic posture even, and I stand by that. So I mean the sense that we project the singular, right? I mean the sense that we project, I have never had to work to be able to know these things or say these things. I mean the sense that we present polished things, and we present a book as though we only did it, but also it wasn't that hard to do it. That's part of what I mean by the heroic. And I think the ways that we are disciplined to write echo that, right? Like, and again, like I don't say that to say that our writing has to become confessional about how hard it is. We certainly do a lot of anxiety share in our cultures, and some of that is needed, right? Like there are lots of reasons for people feeling precarious and anxious in this job, so that is necessary, more than, again, something to feel ashamed about. But that's what I was talking about. I was talking about that, the fiction of the singular, and the fact that the singular has to pose as a hero vis-a-vis the material, when, and not everybody writes like that, but it is the predominant mode, and it's the predominant mode for structural reasons. It's not because people are filled with hubris, it's because people need to have and keep their jobs. So it's as much a critique of the heroism as the structures that make us perform in that way. Can I ask you guys questions?
Sure.
Okay, so I know for Sarah, I don't know if this was true for you, Merve, but that one of the last things that you guys did before the world shut down last year was your book event at McNally Jackson. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Ferrante letters as a book that I was also thinking about when I was doing this one. And one of the things, so for the people who haven't read it yet, haven't picked it up, the Ferrante letters has won the 2021 Prose Award and was just shortlisted for 2021 ASAP. There it is. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book. The letters in it are between Merve and Sarah and their friends, Catherine Hill and Jill Richards. Catherine is a novelist and Jill is a professor at Yale. Her other book is The Fury Archive, which you should also pick up. And they're writing to each other over the course of a summer about the Neapolitan novels of Elena Ferrante. And part of the idea behind the book, as I understand it, is to do a kind of collective, or an experiment in collective criticism, where part of what they're working through in the book is writing to each other as friends, as people who have known each other, or people who are getting to know each other by way of writing about these novels and writing about how the novels are hitting them in the course of having the kind of summer that each of them were having. It's really good, and you guys should buy it. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about was exactly that, right? So like, if for me there was a kind of balance in the book about my like adult selves as they were looking back at my kid selves, for you guys there's like a balance not only between your selves that you were having a few summers ago and the books and the characters that you were reading about, but also in having relations to one another. So like, I think I just reread it in the past couple of days for this conversation, and I forgot that some of you guys didn't actually know each other before you had done the experiment together. Excuse me. So yeah, so I wondered if you guys could talk about like balancing, especially for people, like for the folks that you didn't have relations to, balancing the writing of that kind of personal critical writing with also actually like forming relations or deepening relations that way.
I'm not friends with any of those other people. No. No, Sarah, why don't you start, and then I'll build off of whatever you say.
I mean, it was a lot of the book, or before it was a book, it was this experiment that I wanted to do for contemporaries at Post 45 when I was editing there. And it started because I was tired of a lot of the kinds of things about academic writing that Monica, you were talking about. I was also tired because I just finished graduate school in my first year at Princeton and felt sort of drained and like I didn't want to read books anymore. And also it was a social experiment that could have been a horrible failure, because I had 3 friends who I thought would be interested in talking to each other, but they very well could have not been interested in talking to each other. So it is kind of a miracle that it worked, and it worked the first summer, in which there was like a very rapidly developing intimacy that I think you can see in the letter half of the book. The second half of the book is was written 3 years later, when we had been commissioned to make it a book and wanted to go back to those sort of first reactions in the letters. And meanwhile, all of our relationships had continued. We remained in fairly constant conversation the whole time, even after the first summer was done. So the second half of the book was written as a way of sort of thinking about how each of us as very different writers, all 4 of us have very different styles and very different ways of thinking. I think about Ferrante and about everything. How we could take the material that we've made together and then each in our own way make something different out of it. So the second half of the book is long essays that we each wrote, not directly from the letters, but sort of out of them. So yeah, it was there was no guarantee that it was going to work. And I think it, for me at least, having like done this weird kind of social engineering experiment, it was both very exciting to, you know, the way that whenever you set people up, right, and it works out, it's like exciting to watch the relationships that develop. So that was exciting to me. And I think that it really helped me it helped me sustain a kind of excitement in the project for the whole summer, which is a long time to write with 3 people about one author. And yeah, I think, but I think the element of chance is very important in doing this project. And, you know, another group might not have come this far with it.
Well, in fact, when we tried to revive it, it didn't, right?
What are you?
I was thinking about the reading room at the point which we attempted as another kind of experiment in collective reading and writing that just didn't get off the ground. And so it is interesting thinking about what combination of factors we're conspiring together to make this project possible. But I would just add to that there were obviously moments of friction and moments of difference, particularly when we were writing the introduction. And I had forgotten about the book launch until you reminded me of it, because the moment of embodied togetherness that stands out in my mind, or that I associate with the project, was when Sarah came here and we sat at this table and, like, sentence by sentence wrote the introduction together. And Sarah can tell you that I don't do Google Docs. I'm too neurotic and too possessive, so I won't let anyone have access to a document that I'm working on. So we actually had to sit next to each other, and I would type and we would talk through every word, every sentence, the placement of every paragraph. And to me, that was wonderful, because I have I stage those kinds of dialogues in my head all the time when I'm writing. And sometimes I have those conversations with an editor, but it's very rare to have that with another person when you're actually in the process of writing something. And I think that it taught me a different kind of attentiveness, and a different kind, or a different way to take care with what you are committing to the page. And I'll let Sarah talk about this, but because I think she has more to say about it than I do, but it also became an interestingly egoless process. And of course, that the relinquishing of the ego, and then the moments when the ego comes hurtling back into painful focus, are the great subject of Ferrante's writing, I think. And in fact, you know, she has a scene where those 2 girls are sitting together and writing something together in that same incredibly granular, painstaking way. And I think if you haven't done that, you should, because it does kind of rewire the way that you think about what it means for a sentence to belong to you, or even for a style to belong to you. Sarah, I'll let you say more about that, because I know that's something you think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, as both of you know, I hate the idea of possessiveness in writing. And one of the things that I find most anxiety producing about the job that we have and the kind of work that we're asked to do is the idea that, you know, when you publish an article or when you give a talk, you are making your intervention and you're putting your stake, which is, you know, such a horrifying thing to think about. Like, I am making my claim, it is mine, no one else can have it, you know. That really provokes a lot of anxiety in me. And I think one of the reasons that I loved the Ferrante project, and one of the reasons that I've been interested in various other projects since in collaboration, including Monica, the class that we taught together, I think co-teaching is another way to do this, is that I think that for me at least, and I suspect for many of us, and certainly the response we've gotten to the Ferrante book suggests that many people feel this way, I don't think that I'm my best self, my best thinker or writer when I am just in conversation with myself. I think that I'm much smarter. Like, I always feel like I write better when I'm teaching, which is the opposite of, I think, what some people might say. And I think that it feels very necessary to me to acknowledge that for at least some of us is the fundamental part of having ideas, being a scholar, right? Being a writer of any kind it's not the sort of shutting yourself up in a room and being a lonely genius. Like that's actually very scary to me. Like I would rather kind of, I mean, this is a very Ferrante kind of thing to say, but I would rather kind of lose myself in a conversation or in a crowd and produce something out of that than to really sort of be alone and you know, feel the necessity of being alone in making, you know, whatever kind of aggressive claim, because I do think it is like often quite aggressive and competitive, right? The way that we are encouraged to think about our work.
I wouldn't go that far. Sarah knows about me though. That's a temperamental difference.
Yeah,
I am avaricious. I am more possessive, and I believe in those things to a certain degree. But I mean, Monica, to get back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, you know, the question of how one announces one's presence on the page. And I realize I've phrased that sentence in the most British of ways, how one announces one's presence, which, you know, live here long enough and you'll never use the first person. It will always be, you know, how one does this and how one does that. You know, I was talking to Sarah's class actually about this last week, that there are so many ways to announce the presence or the persona or the sensibility that lurks behind the writing that don't necessitate confession or even the use of the first person pronoun. And the writers that I increasingly admire are people who find different strategies for announcing that on, say, the level of style. So I'm writing a piece right now on Elizabeth Hardwick, and I have been thinking a lot about how in the essays that she writes, particularly on Ibsen, when she goes through her terrible separation from Robert Lowell, when he leaves her for Carolyn Blackwood, and they have that whole kind of agonized series of letters that come out in the Dolphin letters, how she has this amazing technique that she develops in those essays of moving from the intensely specific moments in Ibsen, where she's talking about, you know, Hedda or Nora or whomever, to a kind of typological category. So she has a sentence about Nora, and then she says something like, wives know that when husbands do this, it means this. And all of a sudden, there's a move to both abstract, but also potentially particularize the writer herself. And I think increasingly, I think the Ferrante letters is probably the most personal thing I'll ever do. And I don't think I'll write like that again, in part because I think I become more, I think I become more ashamed of myself the older I get, and the less license I want to give that self to have access to the first person pronoun on the page. And so the more I feel like I'm always looking for these techniques like the one that Hardwick deploys, or the ones that Woolf deploy, or whomever. And so I like, just to get back to what we were talking about shame, I wonder if shame is something that the shameful encounter with the self is not actually at all particular to youth, but it will in fact only intensify as you think about as you think about the future selves that you might encounter.
So I did a class visit with my friend Jekka, and I can't remember if it was Jekka's class, but let's say it was Jekka's class. And one of her students asked me if I would revise the book if like something changed, or if I thought about something differently. And my answer was what my answer remains, which is like, no, that's amazing. Like if I outgrow something, if I'm no longer the person who had to write that book, if I'm no longer the person who needed to work all that out, that for me is a cause for celebration and not revision. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. There's a place for shame. I'm not like anti-shame entirely. That would be monstrous in some ways, right? Like I don't want to live in that world. but for myself, I don't know that I have that much to give. It's a post-Catholic thing. But maybe should we take questions from the audience and see if anyone has things they want to ask us, since we have like 4 minutes left?
You know, I'm just coming back on to say that I feel like since we did that switcheroo, we can also give ourselves an extra 10 minutes or so. It's really absorbing to listen to the three of you. And so sometimes I think folks need a beat or two to think and ask themselves what they might ask you. So this is an invitation to all of you to do that. And what about, Monica, we tag team, you can look at the Q&A and I'll just keep an eye on whether anyone wants to raise their hand. And if you prefer to ask a question that way, then I can also unmute you. And maybe I'll start us off to give folks a little more time with a question that I had listening to the two of you talk about the Ferrante letters, Sarah and Merve. Which is that, you know, the fact that it's epistolary. I was wondering what the importance of or what maybe the specific yield was of the fact that that this happened in letters. And, you know, I'm also thinking, Merve, of your comment that you delete all your emails. And we are in a time of few letters. Letters are a hugely important part of my own life. So I'm particularly interested in what the yield was that it had an epistolary dimension.
I also am a big letter writer, as I think is probably obvious from that book. And in fact, there is unintentionally a letter in the book that I'm writing now. I think that letters to me felt like a way to have a slow conversation that could continue, right? Letters, and we did, I mean, it would be much more romantic to say we wrote them on paper. We did not. We in fact sent them through email, but, oh, I'm sorry, my parents are calling me.
They're not letters at all. I mean, they're stylized as letters, but they weren't actually circulated like letters, right?
But I think that thinking of them as, to me, like thinking of them as letters, right? Thinking of it as an epistolary project was very important, right? Because it's not just essays. It's not just essays that we are writing in proximity to each other, because letters demand responses, right? And in all of them, there was some element of response, either to everyone or to like someone's point in particular. There's a series of them where three of us read, I think Jill and I and Lili Loofbourow, who wrote a guest letter to us, read the same passage, you know, over again a few times. Yeah, I think the sort of call and response aspect was really important.
But I also think the strategy of stylizing them as more letter-like than they actually were in the book is the same strategy that Derrida talks about in one of my favorite works of his, The Postcard, where he talks about how having a postcard which has something written on it that technically anybody who picked it up could read. It's not concealed. It's not in an envelope. You wouldn't have to violate it or open it in order to read it. Invites people to eavesdrop on others' private conversations and to feel like they could be part of the intended audience of that postcard. And so I actually think they follow more of that logic, which is look at these people writing to one another in ostensibly in a kind of private way, but we can intrude or we can surveil what is supposed to be private, and so thus participate in both the publicness of it, but also feel like we're part of that more private group, right?
So you're almost soliciting a kind of voyeurism from the reader. Is that what you're saying? You're almost inviting that attitude. Is that?
I think so. Yeah, I think there is a kind of in-group seduction that's being performed, right? Like, look at the four of us talking to each other. Don't you want to see what we're talking about? And so I think that dynamic is essential to the form. And I think that's actually why people think they are letters, even though they were not technically letters.
Mhm.
I think there also was, like, when we started this project, there was the idea that other people might write to us, right? And there are several guest letters that people wanted to contribute that are in the appendix of the book. Yeah, I mean, there's both an element of, certainly there's an element of voyeurism, right? Our relationships are on display to some extent. But part of the kind of demand for response is a kind of invitation. I was hoping that there was also a kind of invitation, right? That we're writing to each other, but we could also be writing to you, and you could be writing to us, which is, was much more possible when it was all online. And I was the only person like posting things on contemporaries because I had basically like free reign there. And it's very different when it's in the book form, when it is more like a kind of selected letters between, four writers. It has more of that quality. But yeah, I wish we could, like, I want more of that kind of openness, right? That you could also be writing to us or with us.
Monica, should we go? I see that one question in the queue. Do you want to take that from Alessandro?
Yes, can people read it, or should I read it?
I don't think so. I'm not totally sure. Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Okay, I will read it. It's from Alessandro. Hi, Ale. He says, ciao. What an absorbing conversation. One of the ways Magical Habits welcomes you is by thinking about we. You have said we many times tonight, and I was wondering, who is we? Is we English professors? If so, isn't it interesting how fruitful and illuminating it is to read what English professors write about stuff that are not what one expects English professors to write about, like an Italian writer or Baby Monica or Mexican restaurants, etc. So in the author's note in Magical Habits, this is what the author's note is about the we of Magical Habits. And part of how I was thinking about the we, and Alec kind of knows this because we had this conversation when I was editing it, is I was thinking about the we like a liturgical we. So also like what Sarah was saying. So the we is an invitation. The we is someone that is a group, not necessarily a collective, not necessarily even coherent as a group, that I didn't know, but that I was hoping for, which I don't think is particular to Magical Habits, but that is the spirit in which I was writing we. Did you guys use, I don't actually remember from Ferrante letters, did you guys have a we besides the four of you guys?
We only had a we, and it was a contentious sort of making of a communal, a singular voice in the introduction, which we, the four of us, had our first fight about before we sort of figured out how to make it work, because we had been writing as eyes with the knowledge that we were a group of people, like a community of people writing to each other.
Well, because the more sort of particular story is that we were each supposed to contribute a section to the introduction, but I was shamefully delayed in getting my part of the introduction in. So we submitted it with 3 sections, and I said, when we revise, I'll just write over the 3 sections so that it can be one voice. That, of course, is a fairly authoritarian kind of move, or was flagged as such, and caused a great deal of conflict. And that's actually when Sarah and I sat down around the table and wrote that introduction together. And then actually when we did it that way, claiming a we felt much less disingenuous, I suppose. But I mean, maybe this is a question to turn around to you guys, which is I I feel very hesitant in any of the criticism that I write to say we, and you can probably even tell when I'm speaking that what I default to is one as opposed to we. And I feel like the only time I really use we is if I feel like I'm doing something pedagogical in an essay, like we can look at this together. Or if in the text that I'm reading, there is in fact a kind of second person address to the reader, a you that then makes me feel like I can respond with we, because we as readers are all being hailed by that second person address. So I'm just wondering if you have similar kinds of hang-ups, or if you also feel prickly toward the we. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm saying I feel prickly about everything tonight, and maybe it's just because it's almost midnight. It's almost night.
Sarah, do you have strong pricklinesses?
I do. I also feel uncomfortable with like making pronouncements around we. Like I think yeah, like everything that I've said tonight, I think that I'm interested in writing that invites a sense of a shared project, and I'm interested in, and I think that every text has a different we, you know, that every book that one reads or writes has a different we. But yeah, I am a little wary, I think, of saying, you know, to respond to Ali's question, the we of English professors is not necessarily one that I feel comfortable representing, or necessarily even, you know, feeling like I understand, because we all have such different ways of reading and of responding to texts. Yeah, I like the idea of we, but I'm not so comfortable writing it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Mon, what do you think?
So I was thinking about it. I think in writing that I know is strictly academic, or that I'm thinking about as strictly academic, I think I think I use we in the way that Merve was saying, where, you know, I'm instructing some moment, or we're turning our attention to whatever. But I think I don't otherwise, but it's not about prickliness. I think I just wouldn't think of it necessarily when I write. Like writing in that mode is so, you know, in the way that I like critique in the preface, like it's so rarely about we, or any kind of we that I might imagine. Because I think, like you, Sarah, if I am ever saying we, the chances of that being English professors is like 0. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, another, right? So like one of the notes from reader comments for Magical Habits was that I used we too much. So in other writing, I obviously feel very comfortable. But it also, you know, in Magical Habits, I think it was an invitation. I was thinking about it liturgically, in the sense of like, you know, in Mass, when the priest says we, or we are doing a thing, or we are giving thanks for daily bread, there is actually space between the altar and yourself to identify or not in a moment, even if doctrine says otherwise. And the note was that I overused it from the reader reports, that I used it too much and that it made the readers uncomfortable. So there was a lot of we's that I took out of Magical Habits, and thought about why I was using it, and thought about whether or not I earned it in every, so like I went through every we of Magical Habits and asked myself if it was a we that I had earned. And I think that's one way anyways of like making myself not feel prickly or uncomfortable about using it, is asking myself whether it is an earned case.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other person in Magical Habits, and this is something I'm also thinking about in my current project, is you, mm-hmm. right? You address the you, mm-hmm. It was sometimes very specific.
Yeah.
And sometimes a little broader.
I mean, the whole thing, for like the first 10 years of it being a thing that existed in my hard drive, it was all written in second person. Mm-hmm. There was no first person. Mm-hmm. And then now when there's use, it is very specific who that is. A lot of times it's still me.
So folks, I hate to interrupt this, and sometimes I feel like the best event would be an event where that just goes on until everyone has dropped out, you know, and the virtual room is empty, and then you know that you've gone long enough. But it is almost midnight where Merve is, and so I also want to release you to the end of your day, everyone, to end your days as you like. But I think this conversation has given us already so many themes that I imagine will be following us across the conversations that are planned, and they will throw echoes. And I think it will be really interesting and fun to see, you know, what we gets woven on and what falls away. And this is just another invitation to all of you to be part of that, and to put on your calendar the next session in this little seminar or this little collective experiment, which is on November 11th. And again, you can find, and it's with Lili Loofbourow. And you can find the registration information both on Monica's website and on labyrinthbooks.com under the events tab. I urge you to find your copy of Magical Habits, and someone hold up the Ferranta letters again so everyone can see it. You had it there. And of the Ferranta letters, 2 really wonderful books. Get them from your independent bookstore that you feel attached to. And so I wish you were all here to join me in applause and channeling everyone and in thanking you. All right. And till next time, it's nice to be able to say that. Thank you so much. Everybody be well. And bye-bye.
Thank you, Sarah and Merve. Thank you, Dorothea.
Thank you, Dorothea.
Night. Good night.
Yeah, bye. Take good care. Bye.